A lot of hype is building around Ashes of Creation, and it is well deserved because deep down, AOC is a revolutionary title for the MMORPG genre, and in this video I'm going to explain why. Just be warned, it's a bit heavy on game theory, but let's start by talking about vertical progression. Vertical progression has long since been the standard for MMORPGs. You start out at level 1, complete quests, and hunt enemies to gain levels and improve your gear, travel around the world from one area to the next hunting bigger and badder monsters until eventually reaching the endgame where it's time to group up and take out the big boy content. When a game launches for the first time, the population is bunched up together and thus it is easy to find people to play with and help you get immersed into the world if the game is properly structured to do so. But as days or weeks go by, depending on the length of the leveling process, the population will even out for a period until accumulating at max level, leaving the early zones relatively desolate. By then, even though you've beaten the content, you have hopefully grown attached to the world, become a part of the community, and made friendships or bonds that will encourage you to keep playing while awaiting the next wave of content to challenge you. In this system, when a new player joins the game sometime after launch, they do not have the opportunity to make friends and do challenging group content as easily. Most of the other players have moved on and the early zones are empty. Typically, the only thing they have left to do is to chase after the endgame to catch up with the other players or play with pre-established friends. This can make it harder to feel as a part of the community and make strong bonds for new players, so once this player has seen the content, they don't feel as compelled to stick around. The problem is exacerbated as the game gets older and the more expansions are added on with more patches. To keep the existing player base engaged, the distance from the start of the game to the end game gets larger. Older players that dislike the new content or get bored move on, and slowly the population of the MMORPG dwindles. What I'm talking about here is new player acquisition. It's been a long time problem for MMOs due to the way that vertical progression works in typical RPGs. To combat this problem, many features have been implemented into games that detract from the overall fun of the gameplay. Things like making most of the content soloable, adding leveling boosts to reach max level, making it easier to find groups with group finders, scaling content, and then catch-up mechanics or incentives to level alts. The easiest lure to bring new players in is typically a new content release such as a patch or an expansion. But in order to incentivize players' returns or new players to join, the content must be made accessible to them. Making it accessible has a negative side effect towards the players that did not quit the game, however, as slowly they will feel like any progress they made in the game is made pointless through things like catch-up mechanics, leveling boosts, making it harder to feel invested in the world, their characters, and the community. The developers feel forced to constantly choose between encouraging new players to join and appeasing the long-time players. It is a losing battle that brings on a downward spiral. Many of the features implemented with the intention of helping new player acquisition end up harming community, immersion, and investment. Games are forced to rely on treadmill grinds, daily quests, and forms of endless progression to keep their players busy. The problem with these grinds is once a player comes to the realization that they're repeating the same activity on an endless treadmill and are not having fun, they will drop the game completely and are very unlikely to return or say anything good about the game. World of Warcraft private servers were a unique case. They were based on an early iteration of MMORPGs before any new player acquisition mechanics had been implemented into the genre. The world isn't oversized, the leveling zones are not streamlined but rather intertwined with the endgame content, as well as restricted methods of travel that help keep the world alive for a longer period of time after a server launches. Thus, it is much easier for communities to form naturally. Consistently, however, even on private servers, over time, the populations also began to dwindle. The amount of players leveling in the world lessens, and typically by the time Naxxramas is launched, within a few months, the players would be ready for a new server, and one would launch, and players would flock to it and repeat the process. Resetting progress on vertical progression games is not a new concept. It is more or less what MMORPGs do each time they release a new patch or expansion, but it is always a gamble whether or not players will like the new content as much as they liked the old content. Resetting old content rather than adding new is akin to games like Path of Exile or Diablo 3 Seasons. This has been tested out on several MMORPGs recently to see if it is a viable model, in the form of things like Classic WoW, Rift, and ArcAge, but not all of them saw success. Resetting doesn't work well if the original already had so many severe flaws. It's unknown if making an MMORPG with a single persistent world and instead of adding new content, just resetting it over and over would be successful. It works for some of the ARPGs, but eventually players get bored and are not willing to start from level 1 over and over again. But at the same time, you have to wonder, would those players have gotten bored anyway? Does the value of resetting for new player acquisition counteract the amount of players you lose from repeated content? And then there is the issue of meta and min-maxing. Once a game has been around in the same form for a long period of time, players learn to optimize their gameplay so much so that all that's left is speedrunning. So how do you solve the fundamental issue that vertical progression brings into the MMORPG genre? How can you continuously acquire new players without harming the existing player base and without forcing in features that detract from community-driven gameplay which MMORPGs thrive off of? I imagine you'd have a hard time coming up with a solution. It's not an easy problem to solve, and many bright minds and great developers have implemented features into their games that have tried and tried again to tackle it. What does this have to do with Ashes of Creation though? The node system. Rather than try to fight off vertical progression in their world, Ashes of Creation is attempting to make the world dynamic and allow it to change from the players so that the content grows around how the players interact with the nodes. From low level to high level, players find themselves gravitating towards the same areas as the monsters improve based on the levels of the node, not based on the area of the world you are in or the level of the characters as with scaling. Dungeons are not set at specific levels, but rather the enemies scale upwards from low to high the further into the dungeon you delve. It focuses on community and immersion by allowing the players to invest in the nodes through housing and contribution and protecting it in wars. And new players jumping into the game won't be forced to wait until reaching endgame content to see other players and start this investment process, as the way the nodes dynamically grow the enemies outward from the settlements means that players would likely find even higher level players around them when they start out. At level 10, players could easily spot a group of high-level dungeon delvers running past them as the level 10 player attempts to enter the dungeon and kill the lower-level monsters at the entrance, and perhaps get help from them or be recruited by them into their guild. In turn, the level 10 will see the results of investing in a character by looking at the high-level character's gear and can strive towards it and feel a much bigger sense of community. Many of the features proposed work towards this goal of refreshing the content by itself without needing to increase the goal line for new players. Let's say a one-of-a-kind legendary drops from a world boss and is held by the rulers of Metropolis A. The only way other players can acquire that legendary item now is to destroy Metropolis A and steal it, so they organize with the other metropolises and guilds to take down that area, declaring war. If they succeed, the world is reshaped, Metropolis A is destroyed, giving opportunity for new nodes to regrow differently in that area. New content is unlocked as a result, and the one-of-a-kind legendary item switches hands. Or a plethora of other outcomes could happen that would result in the world shifting in other various ways, changing what the players can access in the world. I'm excited about Ashes of Creation for many reasons, and this is one of them. Rather than trying to take on the same problems with the same hated features, Ashes developers are implementing something that reworks the age-old progression path at its core so that fundamentally the game is prepared to keep its population healthy. The node system, along with many other systems in this game, make me genuinely believe that finally, after 20 years of MMORPGs, someone is going to improve the genre rather than make it worse. That's all I wanted to say in this video. Thank you guys for watching, have a great day, I am booping out. Boop.